How would you define the gay scene, and would you use that interchangeably with LGBT community?
I think the gay scene is often understood in a much narrower way to community, and primarily kind of pubs, bars, clubs. Mm-hmm. Whereas the community, I think, is a much broader term, but I think there's kind of a difference between how people see the community, so people talk about the LGBT community, which might be understood even at a kind of global level. And then sometimes I kind of think it's helpful to think about a community, so you might talk about the Sheffield LGBT community.
Okay, so shall we grab another person's perspective on what the gay scene might be to them? Kath, what would you...
My perspective of the gay scene would be an area within the city centre where, like you just touched on, there's cafes, there's bars, there's bookshops, there's somewhere where everybody from all the age spectrum can go and feel safe and meet people.
Why do you think it is then in Manchester? Because obviously Manchester have Canal Street, they have a whole centre, same as Birmingham have Hurst Street, Soho, London. Yeah,
I think because that Manchester has been, that's been there for years and years and years. It's got a reputation now. And it doesn't even, you get groups of straight people going, you go at end parties, don't you? You get stag nights going there. And it's a different culture because we've been that long. Everybody knows, if we want to go out on a gay night, let's go to Manchester. People in Sheffield get a minibus and go out to Manchester gay scene. They go to Leeds and go to the Queen's Quarter of the gay scene. But they don't seem to support their own gay scene here in Sheffield. And I think it's because it's not big enough and it's not diverse enough and it don't cater to everybody.
Is that because it's solely based around kind of drinking and clubs?
Yes, absolutely. That's what I think, yeah.
But what Manchester, what Birmingham, and definitely what London has that Sheffield doesn't, is an expanse of boroughs that are Greater Manchester, Greater Birmingham, and obviously Greater London. So you look at the population of Sheffield, and actually, we kind of have a big green belt around between Chesterfield and Rotherham and all those things, which if there were houses in between, we would become Greater Sheffield. So we don't actually have the same kind of transport links that make Manchester a population of over 1 million, Birmingham's over 1 million, even Liverpool to an extent has, across the Mersey and stuff like that. So there's actually almost a greater sense of the city community, which then kind of brings a large amount of people in.
There's been quite a few places shutting down, so like we had Twist and Fuel. Again, these are obviously all clubbing and drinking areas, but Twist and Fuel and Gossips, which came and went very, very quickly. So would you say, would there be, could it ever be anything like Manchester, or they're just not calling for it?
It's all about business, it's all about demand, and it's all about supply. I think it's difficult to run. The reason why you get all these daytime in Canal Street or in Birmingham, you do have gay cafes and you do have gay sort of like restaurants and stuff, and it's because they can actually cater to daytime trade, evening trade, night trade, and they kind of all feed in together. And you have this trade that spreads out across an end destination. If you have them scattered across the city, people aren't going to go there. So let's say there was Fuels open, and let's say there's Dempsey's either side of the city centre. People are going to go a night out to one of those two venues. That's where they're going to end up on their night. They're probably not going to go to the other one first. They'll go to somewhere else first that's nearer. They can't be a gay district and feed off each other, they're not near enough.
And then funny enough, if you talk to people that did live in Manchester or London, they would go, the scene's not all that, and they would kind of criticise it in various different ways. So I think sometimes if you live in a smaller city that doesn't have a scene, you might imagine that it would be fantastic if it did have a scene. And the people that do experience a bigger scene, that's not necessarily... So it's a bit the grass is always greener kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
One thing that has happened over the years as it became more acceptable to be gay is we've seen more and more gay-friendly nights in venues that don't specify themselves as gay. Mm-hmm. And a few of those have struggled as well.
I got this question earlier, I was talking about this on the radio, and the radio host seemed to suggest that if we had a gay village, that would be financially positive thing for the city. Mm-hmm. But it sounds from what you're saying as if, well, we're not going to go and support it at all. So how do we make something like this work, and do we want it to work?
When you put on a business that's going to be aimed at a specific group, let's say you aim the business at the LGBT community, you immediately, cut it by 10? Mm-hmm. Cut it to a 10, sorry, or even less. Even if you take in kind of friends of friends or whatever, you're really limiting your market, so you've got to be as diverse as possible. It's
a shame we've seen so many places die, and we've seen some explanation, but is there a way we could get an audience behind somewhere? I mean, what would you say, Kath?
I know what I want and what I'd like to see. I would like to see a vibrant gay quota in Sheffield. There's no reason why we can't have it. We've got to get the gay people out there to support it and come in and attend it and support the businesses and that. You need your own bookshop and stuff like that.
But isn't that part of the problem? Being gay friendly, doesn't that take everything away? If you have, I mean, that's what I got to earlier. Because places were becoming gay friendly, people didn't feel the need to go to somewhere that was exclusively gay.
Exclusively gay, yeah.
Well, would you say it's then a positive thing? Because I mean, you mentioned earlier that because Sheffield is one of the safest cities, and so people therefore don't feel a need to or a want and aren't supporting LGBT specific venues and facilities. Would you then say it's maybe a positive thing that maybe this lack of a gay scene or a lack of a gay quarter or a lack of sort of thriving gay village, as you say, is that a positive thing and a sign of kind of integration in a city that is LGBT friendly?
I think there's
I
think there's a difference between people's belief in safety. What I was absolutely kind of really surprised by in my research was how much people are used to going to straight venues or non-LGBT venues, however we might see them, but who don't behave as they would like to in an ideal world. So it might feel safe, but the number of people that said, so a bloke saying, if I'm with my boyfriend, there's no way I'm going to snog him because you don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily a feeling of unsafe and I have to have my own place, I have to have my special venue, but not feeling, as I would argue a heterosexual couple would, so not feeling able to walk down the street holding hands, not having kind of, dancing together, kissing together in a club. And I think people get used to it and don't question it. And I was so surprised in my research, as soon as I started kind of talking about spaces and scenes and stuff, people kept talking about wanting to hold hands or wanting to kiss. And I think we don't necessarily talk about that all the time. We kind of protect ourselves by not doing stuff when we're in certain venues. And I think people get used to it, which is kind of sad, but people just kind of do it.
So we do have Pride and we have the picnics. We do a couple of sort of big events per year. But what can we do to have that feeling all year round? What are you doing? Are you doing anything at Pride to work on these kind of things? Big ask, sorry.
I think the truth is, what you were just describing, people go into Pride or go into an event like that, wherever it might be, where they feel they can act themselves. I would imagine that's similar to walking down Canal Street during the evening. It's quite a safe environment, and actually, I would imagine that is the kind of atmosphere that people are looking for. And even if you're not going clubbing, those places are restaurants and they are cafes and stuff as well. Those things are natural. They're grassroots. They've grown, and they've grown out of an era where homophobia was. And it's not so much homophobia was a lot more rife. It's just that gay people just weren't out in the open. And if you want to have something like that, I think part of this is about just what you were saying. People have grown accustomed to it. Well, actually, that kind of explains that perhaps one way to do it is if you artificially planted that community in. But that's going to involve a lot of money, and not just a lot of money to start, but a lot of business savvy and understanding the community. And it's a community that basically doesn't exist. People don't engage in that way, so it's difficult to kind of predict what's going to happen.
Some people seem to suggest that the gay scene as such is a dated concept. We don't need it anymore. Trevor, what do you think about this?
I think, particularly as a bisexual man, that I feel uncomfortable in some gay venues as well, because there seem to be expectations on my behaviour as well. But generally speaking, I think we have the right to be LGBT everywhere. So there's anyone who runs a venue, runs an event, should include us as a matter of course.
As a bisexual person going out, what is your experience? You've just touched upon it, but what would you like to see from, we're talking about nightlife here, but it might also be, if there was something like an LGBT bookshop or similar, what would you like to see improved at this point?
I'd like to see a multiplicity of things. I'd like to see an LGBT community centre, but I'd also like to see every venue that puts on music putting on bands with LGBT people in them.
But do you feel harassed on the fact, because of your sexuality? Or?
I just think it's the same as everybody else. Don't assume. I mean, I've been vigorously questioned on the door of a gay club when I went in on my own because I don't look gay, whatever that means. Yeah, when I turned up a week later with a man, fine. I still look the same.
Do you think then there's maybe an issue?
So it's just people not assuming.
Do you know maybe there's then potentially a kind of an exclusivity, a kind of segregation in terms of, is that a positive thing to that, to kind of, if it's LGBT and therefore it's kind of solely LGBT, is that maybe driving a wedge further into a community and not bringing everybody
I think
together?
we need both, you know, because sometimes we do need gay-only, LGBT-only spaces. But as I say, we need integrated venues as well.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I've got some straight friends that are really nice, but they become very aware of my politics on this twice a year, you know. LGBT History Month in February and around sort of Pride time. Actually, there's a lot of other months and days of the year I'm still here. And so we all are.
What can we do to create a better environment for transgender people who arguably are, you know, not as in front in terms of rights, you know, we're sort of behind on that question, I feel. What would you say, Eleanor? Have you come across this in your research as well, or is it?
I think that's one of the disadvantages. So when we talk about LGBT as in a collective, whether that's a community or a scene or just the kind of very term, it does tend to bring about assumptions, whether that's that you're gay rather than bisexual. And I think lots and lots of trans-identified people would say that they feel kind of stuck on the end, not necessarily included.
What would you advise from your research that people think about when they put on events?
Some of it I think you can explicitly set out, whether it's at the start of an event or the start of a publication or whatever it is. You might say, actually, I'm never going to use he or she, I'm always going to use a neutral term, or you might say I use he or she, but it'll be from how people identify themselves. Or I think you can do things like that. In terms of advertising, I think it's just trying to get it really diverse and not making an assumption, oh, so say, for example, I've put an advert in Diva and I've put an advert in Gay Times, I'm making those up, but oh, so I'm done now. You know, no, you're not done, because not everyone reads Diva and not everyone reads Gay Times. So, do you know what I mean? So it's about thinking where you're promoting stuff and trying to tap into, again, for want of a better word, communities.
So, Kath at LGBT Sheffield, you're looking at setting up a community centre. Are you working in particularly with the trans issue there as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got Nell. Nell is part of our management committee, and she does a lot of trans work for us. And she's a speaker on our behalf as well. She spoke at LGBT History Month. She done it at Idaho. We're well on top of trans issues, as you can imagine, with Nell on the committee. Yeah.
I had a friend, a trans friend called Rachel at university, and she's a straight woman, and we organised this club night, and she commented and she said, well, everyone's here's nice, but they're either gay men or lesbian women predominantly, and I'm a straight woman, so this isn't fulfilling that function for me. And so and I would say it is one of the primary functions of a gay scene would be that either to be open or to find someone to be in a relationship with. There's a question about whether or not, by definition, it doesn't cater to T, and how can it be made to? And I'm not entirely sure it can. So that's something to consider.
What would you say, Trevor, on this? When you've put on a lot of events throughout the city as well, what can we do to be trans inclusive?
I think involve trans people in what we're doing. Yeah, basically, because unless you're trans yourself, you can't speak for trans people.
The future of the gay scene, does it involve being inclusive of straight people? Do we just not want to be segregated in future, or would it be? Would we have a gay village in Sheffield or in every city? What would you say, Trevor?
I think the way to really change things is to be integrated, and potentially that puts us on a crash course with the rest of society, but perhaps that's what we need. So I'm a great believer that we need to be integrated in everything, and okay, we'll say we won't have a separate gay scene, but we want to be part of every venue, every festival, every council department, and take them on. Yeah, I think that's the way to challenge prejudice. Once people know, particularly for bisexual people like myself, visibility is really, really powerful. And if I just go to other places and pass as straight.
So that puts a lot on the individuals. It kind of puts
the
it
pressure
on
on a
us.
bit.
And so if we were just talking about some people that might feel vulnerable,
Yeah.
whether that's they've had really bad experiences in the past or they're particularly young, I kind of get you that if you're confident enough and I should hold hands with my partner, you know, in straight venues.
I think it's just a case of looking at outcome-focused objectives. So, what do people get or want to get out of a gay scene, and is that going to be achieved by having a gay scene, or can it be achieved in alternative ways? If I go to a straight club, I'm not going to bump into somebody and hit it off, because statistically that's very unlikely, because they're all going to be straight. If I go out with my friends and their friends from work, again, the same issue. So in terms of meeting people, I mean, you know, we're in the age of dating apps and online dating and stuff. So you could actually say, well, that's given over. And actually, that entire issue about it doesn't cover the issue about being in a relationship in public, but it covers the issue about meeting people. You've got online dating, you've got mobile dating and stuff. So actually, you could say that those two things are going to supersede going out to specific gay venues, and it doesn't matter on that front.
I totally agree. I think we do need a gay scene. It's been a long time coming, and it's got to come, and whether we'll get it, I don't know.
I'm like quite a young gay man, and I don't see why, like most people would only think in a small town, or if you come from like a small area, or if you don't know the different places to go to, you would find dating more easier. But for most people, dating isn't really an option. You want to go out and see the person, meet them before because you don't want to. You could be talking to anybody online, as we know already. You want to be getting out there, like a community centre, for instance. That would be a great place for people to meet each other, not just as like sexual relationships or friends and everything like that. It's just like, you know, for more like, you know, hanging out, friends and stuff. And I think something like that would really, really be like, you know, good for the community as well. Not just for like us, like you said, like when you sit down and have a coffee or somewhere, or get to meet your friends.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. I'm glad you support it. Yeah.
Anything ever been raised about including people on the asexuality spectrum? And I think there may be a lot of assumptions about the asexuality spectrum, like they may think if you're asexual you don't ever want anything with anyone ever, but it's more complex than that. It affects different people differently, but in some ways it can be just much harder. There's a much slimmer chance of finding someone, feeling attracted to them and it being mutual, or it may take a much longer time. And I think so traditional dating may not be an option, or people would just see you as a time waster, but it's something I would particularly be interested in getting on the map more.
Certainly at Diversity Festival we are going to try and have some little talks maybe about things like asexuality, just so people can start a discussion about it.
Sheffield Pride and Picnic network together because you're both LGBT, and I would say that coming together and binding would probably make your chances a lot stronger if you wanted to develop some kind of community centre or community or gay scene or something like that.
Well, our objective isn't to create a community centre. That's LGBT Sheffield's, and to be honest with you, we do things like we do the hate crime and stuff, and this is a project that I'm actually becoming more fond of this evening than I was before, and I'm seeing more benefit to it and more practicality to it. But it's not something that we're dedicated to, and I totally get what you're saying. But on the other hand, if we got together on this, would it not just double the workload that each of us has to do? If I was helping on that, we're all volunteers, so we've got a limited amount of time. So if we're going to be focusing on running Pride and then also contributing to this, there's only so many hours in a day. I'm
not quite sure I agree with that. I did agree with unlikely. I did agree with comments, Adam's first comments, which is not very usual. But on that comment, I think we should, because you know about volunteers, we could share volunteers, because volunteers are a big source. You cannot run these events without volunteers, even if it just means sharing volunteers at each event. You know, I mean, that would be a good thing.
Uniting
together
and
absolutely,
showing how it's supposed to be.
Absolutely.
I think what lets Sheffield down is the networking system. Everybody's so concentrating on their own little venue, how much they're getting out of it. And it's like, it's not you're that are getting out of it, it's the community. It is. And the differences we've had, we should put to one side and start working together. I agree, yeah.
Also with events that aren't gay specific, I welcome input from people from Pride and LGBT Sheffield and stuff I'm doing. In fact, Nell has some input in Diversity Fest. So,
What, I'm really pleased to hear this.
Opinion,
What a great
just your opinion,
everyone
just opinions, we're not giving you more work to do.
Okay.
Just
Now,
opinions.
one more question from the audience, and then we can all go outside and network together.
Okay, so if we need our own spaces, but we also need integration, and we need to tap into and cover as many communities as possible, at what sort of level, whose sort of responsibility, how do we achieve and maintain all this, basically?
I think there's a certain amount of responsibility on service providers to always be inclusive. So statutory services, whether that's councils or the NHS, or to include everyone in terms of the kind of integration. I think it's very difficult to tell businesses what to do. Capitalism doesn't work like that. So I think that's kind of a difficult thing. Yes, I can see it must be really hard to get volunteers to work on events or projects, or so that's difficult. And obviously in the current climate, everyone's going to be concerned about money, and councils are being forced into the position of having to kind of cut budgets. So, you know, maybe in the past a council might have provided, you know, a grant to kind of get you going, and I can't imagine that's going to happen anymore, whether we think that's right or wrong.
Well, I think I in contrast to what I said earlier about we should parachute in like 5 different clubs and bars and cafes in the same place, and you got your quarter, and then people will realise what they're missing. I think that might be nice. I don't think it's ever going to really happen. And I think the reality is things start small and they grow. Yeah. The difficulty is that when you're talking about a gay scene, owning property and running business is not small by anyone's scale. And I mean, Trevor, you talked about there were gay nights being run that were still struggling, and they struggle for various reasons. Yeah. And it could be because they weren't run well, or it could be because the venue wasn't very helpful. I know a couple of them that was an issue. But you have to start small, unless you have, like Kath mentioned, £1 million get donated.
I think the only way that the gay scene's going to take off in Sheffield is if all the gay people support it. You can't leave it to one group of people like LGBT Sheffield or Sheffield Pride to do it all. You've got to get involved, you've got to volunteer, you've got to come to these events, you've got to support the gay venues, otherwise they're gone, they're lost.
Great.
It's down to you, not us, yeah.
Well, my view is that we need to make sure we make LGBT people like ourselves welcome and included in everything that we do. And that doesn't cost money, that's just to do with attitude. And if venues and places are excluding us, let's stop using them. They'll go bust.
Thank you. Great.